I want to start out talking about my brother. I start every presentation with my brother. I have a brother who has schizophrenia. And when he was a young man, basically late teens, it was as if someone walked up in back of him and injected him with a drug, and he became a different person within about a 2-week period of time. We absolutely had no clue that this was going to occur. He was doing great in school, he's athletic, he was tall, good looking, graduated from high school, just about ready to go off on his own, go to college, and suddenly we were faced with someone that we couldn't even recognize. This happened in the 60s, and we basically had two choices. We could institutionalize my brother, or we could keep him at home. So of course we tried to keep him at home, but there was nothing else along the continuum of care that we could choose from. So we kept him at home, but my brother's 6'9", and he can be really hard to handle, and we were finally forced to put him into an institution. I saw firsthand the impact of an institutional environment in a person's life. My brother was basically disabled by this institution. And I can tell you how I know that. It took them years to stabilize him to the point that he could come back into our community. And when he did come back, he had another setback, and we thought we'd have to institutionalize him again. Only this time there was a halfway house with house parents, and they were able to stabilize him within 2 weeks versus the years in that institutional environment. This is the kind of impact that we have with every design decision that we make, with every detail that we put in projects, and especially in health design projects. We create people with disabilities, or we empower people so that they can do what they want to do and they're no longer disabled. We have the power to eliminate disability by design, not just accommodate it, because people are only disabled when they can't do what they want to do. They're not disabled by their physical differences. We all have physical differences. I wear glasses. You may have something that I can't see. You never know what people have. We all have physical differences. The issue isn't our physical difference. The issue is whether we can do what we want to do. And by the power of design, we can give people the ability to do what they want to do. It's also important for us to use our creative skills to visually integrate the ideas so that we don't stigmatize by design, so that we don't segregate people into user groups, into those disabled people over there and the rest of us. A ramp is a very stigmatizing piece of equipment. It forces everyone to go in one way while everyone else goes in the front door. We lived in a ranching town down in southern Colorado, and there was a church down there that wanted to get people up the steps at the front of the church, so they put in a big platform lift. Well, it was mostly older women that were having trouble getting up these steps, and if you think those women are going to get on that platform lift and get vibrated all the way up and get, basically pointed out in front of the congregation, to say nothing of the efficacy issues of using those controls, it just didn't happen. They continued to drag themselves up by the handrails rather than use this lift. It's a classic example of segregation by design. So our job is to use our creative skills to visually integrate this technology so people really want the stuff in their home or their office, their workplace, or in healthcare. And then the final point that I'd like to make before we start the slides is that this is an opportunity to make an enormous contribution. Those of you that are interested in healthcare design have gotten into this field because you want to make a contribution, because you want to make a difference in people's lives. And if you can design your healthcare facilities universally, you can make a massive difference in people's lives. You can keep patients in control of their own health. You can keep them doing for themselves rather than having to depend on staff to do for them. They can maintain their independence while they're in healthcare, and they can take charge of their health so that when they leave, they know what to do to maintain their health. And all of this can come from universal design. I started out in high-end residential interior design, basically making rich people look richer. You know, that isn't what high-end residential design is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about improving the quality of people's lives, no matter how much money they have. But that isn't what I was doing. I was putting status symbols in people's homes, and I thought somehow I would find eternal satisfaction by doing that. But that didn't happen, so I moved into contract, and I built up my business until I had 12 employees, which is a pretty good-sized small business, and promptly graduated out of my area of expertise until I was doing something I really wasn't trained for, and that is finding work for all these employees and working with bankers and lawyers. And I grew to really dislike interior design. I wanted out of this field big time. But you know, I had 12 employees. I hung on for the employees until finally I just hit this wall and I could not do it anymore. And I fired all in 12 employees. I walked away from a thriving business, and I went on this search for purpose. I don't have children. I knew early that I couldn't, and that I'd have to have my career be my way of making a contribution. And I didn't know what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So one of the employees that I fired invited me into a Bible study. Now, I'm not trying to impose my value system on you here, but I believe this quest for mission and purpose is a spiritual issue. And if any of you have an interest in working on that, let me know. I teach a course on purpose, on finding mission. So just email me at cynthia@agingbeautifully.org, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. But at any rate, I came out of this study with a very focused mission after 3 or 4 months of pretty tough spiritual work. And that mission was to improve the lives of older and disabled people through interior design. Now, I hear you, that's sweet, she's on a mission, nice young thing. Well, the real miracle here is I stayed on that mission for 35 years. I have not deviated, and I have that sort of artistic personality where I like to jump around from thing to thing and try all these unusual things, and that hasn't happened with universal design. And the reason is I love what I do. I've loved it for every day of those 35, 40 years now, and I want that for you. But you know, even more importantly, with every little design decision that you make, you could be creating a design legacy, a body of work that would continue to contribute for decades. You're not building 5, 10-year buildings here. These healthcare facilities that we're building last for decades, and the details that we put in them either disable for decades or they empower people for decades. I want you to be able to look back at your body of work when you're my age. I'm 65, and when you look back at your body of work, I want you to be able to say, I have left a design legacy, a body of work that's contributing, that has been empowering people, thousands and thousands of people, and that's the real message that I have for you today. That's the most important message. This is an opportunity to make a massive contribution. What I want you to do is to design every project universally, not just projects for elderly people, not just projects for people with disabilities, but every project with as much universal design as you put sustainable design in. Just try to integrate it as much as you possibly can, because you never know who's going to use it. You know, you just don't know, and you have to try to make that contribution by doing this. That's the most important thing that I'll tell you today. So that said, let's jump into healthcare. I'm going to take you through long-term care, ambulatory care, and acute care. We're going to hit 14 different levels along the continuum of care, and I'm going to try to show you ways that you can keep patients in charge of their own health by designing healthcare facilities. The first project that we have is one of my favorite projects in the world. I had my offices in assisted living for 2 years, and I basically tested products with the older people. And I've got to tell you, I never really saw anybody adjust to living in assisted living. It never felt like home to them. I am of the opinion that all nursing homes and assisted living in this country should be closed. That's a pretty outrageous point of view, but I'll tell you why I hold that point of view. I've studied long-term care all over the world. You may not realize this, but it's illegal to build a nursing home in Scandinavia right now. it's illegal. And the reason is they have so many better options than skilled nursing to take care of people. And of all those options for long-term care, this is my favorite project in the world. It's in Holland. It's called the Berkeley Project. It guarantees that if you move into one of these beautiful 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, you will never move again. You will never be moved to assisted living. You will never be moved to skilled nursing. Even if you develop Alzheimer's, you will not have to go in, you will not have to leave your apartment. You will not have to leave your spouse, and your spouse will have great life quality even if you have advanced Alzheimer's. Now, how in the world could they guarantee anything like this? Well, let me tell you, it was done initially as an experiment in the 90s. They moved 60 people out of skilled nursing, 60 out of assisted living, and 60 out of independent living, and they said, we're going to try to deliver all the health care to you in your apartments instead of delivering you to the health care or moving you around from level to level to level. That's called a continuing care retirement complex, which is the best of health care in our country. In Holland, they don't move you to the health care, they deliver the health care to you every 15 minutes, and you're billed on a 15-minute basis. So you don't have to pay the average cost of a nursing home, which is $7,500 a month right now in our country. Half of all nursing homes cost more than $7,500 a month. You don't have to pay that. You simply pay rent and the amount of and for the amount of health care that you use. So if you need 24-hour care for a period of weeks, that's what you'll get in your apartment. But most people don't need 24-hour care. Oregon has estimated that 93% of their people are inappropriately placed in nursing homes. Massive numbers of people are in nursing homes who don't belong there, are receiving 24-hour care, and they don't need it. So this project just bills you on a quarter of an hour basis. They've been averaging about $3,000 a month, less than half of the cost of skilled nursing, to keep people in their apartments, in these beautiful 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And the apartments, they have 2-bedroom apartments so that you can have a loved one move in with you, like one of your daughter or a son, come and help with your care and reduce your costs because they're helping with the care. Or spouses can live together in separate bedrooms so that they can get their sleep. You know, it just makes some sense to have this. So the first thing you see about this is an escalator, which isn't a great idea for older people, you know, to get them in and out of this complex. But what you don't know is that there's an elevator right to the side of this. You can see it over here, right on the side down there. So the idea of the escalator is to pull people in from the community. It goes right out onto the street, you see, and they, rather than isolating people from the community and protecting older people from the community, they take just the opposite approach. They want to pull people in from the community. So when you get to the top of the escalator, you have this beautiful Glaston Atrium surrounded by shopping and stores, and there's a restaurant right here that serves gourmet food and delivers to all of the apartments. This isn't congregate dining. I mean, how many of you have spent a lot of time in congregate dining? Probably you, but nobody else. And I mean, we've all spent time in restaurants, and it's a space that we're familiar with. And the worst thing you can do to an older person is move them into a space that they're unfamiliar with and try to make them adjust. And in these CCRCs, the idea is we're going to move you in to one space after another, constantly changing your location, reducing your possessions, reducing your control, trying to make you adjust constantly. You know, that's just not a great idea. This is a much better idea in my estimation. So you can see how all of these apartments look down through the glass atrium down and kind of see what's going on. They also, on the other side of the apartment, have views outside, and that way you can kind of make a decision about the weather or about that threatening gang that's down there before you make the commitment to go outdoors. The reason this works is it's built over an outpatient geriatric rehab hospital. Now, I wouldn't do this in the States, and at the end of this series of slides, I'll show you what I would do here, because I think it looks pretty institutional and a little bit frightening to people. But the Dutch do what's called spatial differentiation. They want it very clear that the place that you receive health care is not the place that you live. They don't want this to look at all like a residence, because it's not okay with them for you to live in a healthcare facility. What we do in our country is decorate our nursing homes to look like home, you know, which is even more confusing in my estimation. I'd prefer to go to some place that is offering professional health care than a place that is decorated to look like home, my opinion, but the Dutch tend to agree. However, there is sort of a halfway point, and that's called a medical spa, and it's actually a really cool idea, so I'll show you that at the end of the series here. But they do very clearly differentiate the space. Now this whole complex is gurney accessible, so even if you're bedridden, you can come down to this geriatric rehab center and get 8, 10, 12 hours of rehab a day if you need it, and still have the dignity of returning to your own apartment every night. Nobody lives in the healthcare facility. That's the key point. This is a layout of the rooms. They got some things right and some things are wrong. You can see this little balcony here on this edge. This overlooks the atrium, and that way people can, it's called a social layer. It's a technique we use in design to help people feel more comfortable about joining social spaces. So they'll hang out over this balcony, see what's going on down in the atrium, and work their way into the social situation. The same with this balcony on the back here to overlook what's going on outside before they make the commitment to go out. This down here is called a berging, and I don't know what it is. We think it's ski storage, but we're not, no, I'm kidding. We're not sure. Probably just some sort of a storage unit. But one interesting thing about this floor plan, if you'll notice, the bathroom layout is, the bathroom floor space is almost as large as the kitchen over here. And the reason they have such a large bathroom is it's gurney accessible. They have a sliding door here, and then you can roll someone with from bed onto a gurney. It'd be pretty tight here, but roll them around the corner, straight in here, use the handheld shower, and give them a bath, and then push them back in. Truthfully, I don't like the layout of this very much. I think we can do a lot to improve it. It's really a very small space, and this is a 1-bedroom unit. They also have 2-bedroom units as well. But the key is that this is designed to support a caregiver. I think we can do a better job of supporting a caregiver than they're doing, but they did get a start on it. What's really cool is the whole building is gurney accessible. So you see people on gurneys attending parties, you see them going to art exhibits, you know, it's sort of an interesting idea. This is the Glaston Atrium, which is a very comfortable space. Nice levels of daylight, very high levels of light. It's estimated that older people may need 3 to 5 times the quantity of light that the rest of us do. So it's nice to have these really high lighting levels. On the downside, it's not very good acoustically. Look at all the hard surfaces, the ceiling of glass, the hard surface floor, and then there's also a water feature that runs through the whole thing that adds additional ambient noise. So it's kind of difficult, and I think that's an area in which we could improve the design, is to make it better acoustically. Although I've got to say, I like that relaxing sound of running water. We even have research showing how much stress is reduced by the relaxing sound of running water. So it's not bad from that perspective, but it does make it more difficult to hear. Here's one of the parties with someone drinking alcohol on a gurney, you know. This is kind of foreign to us. Now, one of the downsides of this idea is that you would end up spending a lot of time with sick people, because people are not going to move from this complex no matter what happens to them. Now, it's a little different if they constantly move sick people in and out of the complex than if this sick person is someone that you've lived next to for 10 years and they've started getting sick. You know, you might be a little more sympathetic and willing to have them come to a party on a gurney. Do you see what I mean? So the Dutch are more accepting and more tolerant than we are of sick people, but on the other hand, I think we could learn to do that. I know I'd be willing to do it in order to be able to move into a complex and know I'd I'd never have to move again. I'd never go to a nursing home. I'd never go to assisted living. I think that would be, a marvelous thing. The way that they work for people with Alzheimer's is that sometimes people with Alzheimer's get into variable wake sleep cycles, wandering. They may keep their spouse up at night with all this. So they do 15-minute checks all night to make sure that the spouse can get a good night's sleep. You can have video monitoring if you want that of the spouse. And then they have an Alzheimer's daycare center on site, so the spouse has the full day to themselves and they can get their sleep. They can be with their loved one as much or as little as they want to be. And I've actually been over there and interviewed these spouses, and they said we had tremendous life quality, and we were able to give my husband the gift of staying with him for life, which I think is a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. This is one of the restaurants, and as I said, they're gourmet restaurants, a place where you'd be proud to take your loved ones. People are not proud to take their loved ones into many congregate dining facilities, but to have them come to a restaurant and visit you, which encourages more visiting. It would be a lot easier for me to visit someone in a complex like this than it would in a nursing home. They have about a dozen of these complexes in Holland now, and last time I checked, they had a waiting list of 12,000 people. They are so popular. And of those 180 that they put in initially in that complex, they kept every one of them in their apartments for life, except for 6 who developed Alzheimer's, and that's why they added the Alzheimer's daycare center so that they could keep everybody in their apartments for life. They're called Dutch Lifetime Apartments. It's a great model. I'm working right now to build a similar model in Michigan. I can't guarantee that we're going to do it, but we'd like to do it as a prototype, and we're working diligently on that. And then we'd like to have it replicated. It's a high-rise construction, which isn't appropriate for all areas of our country. And it's helpful to have high-rise because that way you don't have to go on your gurney outside somewhere. You can easily just get into the elevator and get down to the rehab hospital. There's also a scale required to make this profitable. So you have to have a certain number of units to make it profitable, and high-rise construction allows you to achieve that. An economy of scale, that's the term I was looking for. But rather than build it over a geriatric rehab hospital, I could see it built over a medical spa with a workout center and all sorts of OT, PT, visiting physicians, dentists. I could see people coming in and offering services periodically to people. This is the Condell Medical Center by Pratt Design in New York, and it has a nice coffee shop. It has a little store in the background that hasn't been stocked yet. It was brand new when these photographs were taken. It has a beauty salon, and it has a very comfortable hydrotherapy room instead of a really scary, hydrotherapy setup. It has a nice locker room with a big workout center. So this is the place where you work out every day, and it's a lot less threatening to go in there for health care. And they try to kind of hide the health care around the perimeter of the medical spa so you don't have that threatening health care feeling when you're in the medical spa, which I think is a great idea. But I think that idea would actually sell in the United States, to have a really neat apartment building built over a medical spa. I don't think that's stigmatizing at all. I would move in there. I would have no problem with it. This is the Anna Marie Centrad in Copenhagen, and I was actually hired by the National Symposium of Health Design to do research all through Northern Europe on home health care provision, which I think was really, Northern Europe is where the best home health care is taking place. This complex does something kind of interesting. They mix single moms with older people. So the single moms or the children and the older people share senior care daycare. They share the workout facilities. The older people are getting their rehab. The single moms are working out. They share the dining together. And you have these older people sitting on their balconies overlooking the playground where the kids are playing. So there's a nice mix of generations and a real feeling of life in this. And they, as I said, they share facilities. So it actually works out really well for both of them. This is this is a hospice, and I wanted to talk to you briefly about a few things in hospice. This hospice is in Lancaster County, and it has in Pennsylvania. It has a really unique solution. Their garden outside of the hospice is accessible to the patient bed, meaning you can roll the patient bed out of the hospice, out into the garden. They actually have medical gases outside. So rather than being cooped up all the time, you can go outside even if you're bedridden and have access to daylight, which I think is kind of cool. That's the sketch of what it looks like. And of course, in hospice, the idea is palliative care. It's not to help someone to heal, it's to make them most comfortable for the end of their life. In hospice, you need to realize that most of your patients are quite weak. So having a seat in the shower is a good idea. That seat's removable so that you can use it as a standard shower if you want, or you can use a seated shower and use the handheld shower. That shows you the seat and how it can be removed. This is a new design that's permitted by the new ADA. You can now go to a shorter grab bar in back of the toilet, and because of that, you can add a pull-down grab bar right next to the toilet, and that way you can have grab bars on both sides of the toilet. It used to be that you had such a long grab bar required behind the toilet that you couldn't get that pulling grab bar in, and then people who have weakness, like people in hospice, who really need grab bars on both sides to push up, couldn't do it. But now you can use a shorter grab bar, and an excellent idea is to recess the sink in the clear floor space next to the toilet. That way you don't have a massive bathroom with a lot of clear floor space. It's really a good space-saving technique. And at the same time, you have the sink close to the toilet in case you have to clean up after a bowel and bladder program. This was the old solution, this ugly institutional solution, to try to get a grab bar in close to the toilet without ruining the transfer space for a wheelchair user. We use carpet frequently in hospice or basically in many healthcare installations. I wanted to tell you about a research project I did at Collinwood Assisted Living when we were located there. We carpeted all their public bathrooms. This does not sound like a good plan. We have a 40% incontinent population. That means there's a lot of urine on this carpet. And we put it in and left it in for a whole year without even cleaning it once. Does that sound disgusting or not? So then I got gloves on and I went and cut a little piece of this carpet out and sent it into a lab and had it cultured just to see what was growing on it. And I sent it in with a piece of brand new carpet. Now we would have cleaned it if we'd noticed odor, but there was no odor and it didn't look like it needed to be cleaned. After a year of being down in a public bathroom with an incontinent population. So I sent this in to be cultured, and here's what we ended up with. You can see the mold and bacteria growing in the agar on the edges of the Petri dish, but after it was cultured, there was still no mold or bacteria growing on either piece of carpet, either the new piece of carpet or the one that had been down for a year. And that's why there was no odor, because nothing was growing on it. Why did it work so well? It turned out that I specified it properly. What I did is I specified an antron filament, which is inherently antimicrobial, and then I injected an antimicrobial clear to the back of the carpet fiber so that it wouldn't be washed off every time it was cleaned, if it got cleaned. And then I put a moisture barrier in to keep the urine up on top, and I sealed the subfloor with an acrylic polymer to make sure that the urine, if it did get through, maybe through the seams or whatever, I sealed all the seams, but if it did get through, it wouldn't get into the plywood subfloor. And it worked like a charm. That antimicrobial was the secret. It worked great. So why in the world would I put carpet in a public bathroom? Well, think about it. Where does all the slip and fall occur? In the bathroom. That's where all the slick surfaces are. Where are all the hard surfaces? Where do people get all the injuries? In the bathroom. Carpet will cushion the blow if you go down on it. So it actually made some sense to do this. And if you can use carpet in a public bathroom with a 40% incontinent population, you tell me someplace in healthcare that you can't use it. I mean, you can use it all through healthcare. You can get betadine out of it. You know, you're actually going to be reducing bacterial and fungal counts in the hospital because of the antimicrobials. So it actually is a pretty good idea. Another issue that we deal with in long-term care, well, really on many levels in the continuum of care, the issue is veiling reflections. Can you see the shiny veiling reflections on either side of the carpet there? And the reason that this is a problem is people look at these reflections and think they're water. And then they worry that they're going to slip on them, and they balance on one foot and try to step over the perceived water. Not a great plan. Now notice how the carpet down the center completely cuts the veiling reflections. Other things you can do to eliminate veiling reflections: don't put windows and doors at the end of a hallway, or you'll have a glare all the way down the hallway. You want to use multiple sources of lighting, in other words, diffuse lighting, rather than a few hot spots, directed lighting. So use multiple sources of diffuse lighting. And again, make sure that your finishes don't reflect. The other kind of glare that you have to design around is called contrast glare. And it's that sort of dazzle effect that you get when you go from a dark interior to the sunlight outside and you're dazzled. That's called contrast glare. And you can control that by planning transitions from the inside to the outside, say an entry that you walk through, or perhaps on your windows, putting window coverings that will prevent the degree of contrast, like shears are a good example. Just a bit on orientation. This is a giant issue in long-term care. You want to not only work on your orientation, but also wayfinding. Orientation tells you that you are here. Wayfinding says, how do I get from here to there? So you want to be able to have someone look at the room and know that this is the dining room. You don't want the special purpose room where everything is changed constantly, or people will constantly be disoriented, where the dining room turns into the game room, and it turns into the cocktail hour room, and they move everything around in one room. That type of flexible space is not a good idea in long-term care. In wayfinding, you want to be able to tell people how to get from here to there. So I would say take a left at the antique dress. Research shows us that that memorable cues, like an antique dress, are 50% more effective than a plant or a banner or a cue that you could easily forget. And it also helps you get back, because when you see the antique dress, you'll remember that's the place that I'm supposed to make the turn to get back. There are other ways to do orientation. For example, there's a water feature here to the right of this reception desk, and you can hear where the reception desk is anywhere in the building. It'll pull you back to that reception area, so that will help you with orientation. Sometimes we use fragrance for orientation. Fragrance is actually something that people don't even think about, but more and more we're seeing it used in healthcare. In long-term care, we're using fragrance to trigger long-term memory for people that have any degree of memory loss. And something like the fragrance of suntan lotion is wonderful for triggering long-term memory of great experiences that you had on the beach. Strawberries have been shown to be a very effective fragrance to trigger long-term memory for some reason. I don't know what the reason is for that. But we also use fragrance for orientation and for wayfinding. We may make one space have a different fragrance than another space so that you can recognize that space. We even go so far as to use changes in air pressure, a small amount of air, to differentiate between one space and another space. More common ways for differentiation are color change, changing heights of the ceiling, changing the decor, trying to make it very clear that you're going by a different space. Older people take their cues from the floor. They look at their feet. It's called downward gazing because they're afraid they're going to fall. So you might be more successful putting messages like walk or jog on the floor to give people a message. You can also give them a message by simply changing, by contrasting when you want people to take notice. For example, you're walking along on the floor and you see this contrast in the floor covering. You look up and there's the reception desk. You're not going to necessarily see the sign that says reception up here, but you might notice there's a change in the floor covering. So it's just something to kind of factor in your design in long-term care. This was a rehab hospital that I worked on for 5 years. It's called Laguna Honda, 1,200-bed hospital, $400 million construction. I did the universal design on this, and we worked with people of all different abilities to try to offer design that was supportive. And this was another rehab hospital I worked on. Rehab hospitals are really receptive to universal design because they're trying to teach people to be as independent as possible. So the more universal design you can put in, the more independent the patients can stay. One of the best features we did on this in this patient room is we put a twin bed at the back of the room. That's in that window seat. So it's a full twin bed. So if someone wants to come and room in, they've got an extra bed. If the patient wants to go spend time in the window and see what's going on outdoors, it's a very popular spot for them to get out of bed for a while and go look outside. This is another way you can add a patient bed for rooming in. Another just very handy thing that allows you to push the bed up into a bookcase or else just open it into a single bed. In the Toronto Rehab Hospital that I just showed you, we have this great education center, and you have this sort of teachable moment when people are in rehab. They're really interested in learning about how to do something, what their choices are, what they can do at home, how they can change their home, and the families are really interested in learning that too. So you should have a great education center where people can look up things on computer, try out products, sort of try before you buy, and that's what we put into Toronto Rehab. This is Baden-Baden, and it's an interesting place where people receive health care. You go to the spa, so you don't have the stigma of going to a hospital, but they do some pretty sophisticated health care here, which is sort of fun. It shows you what lengths people go to prevent having to go to the hospital and to keep anyone from knowing that they're getting any health care. People get really embarrassed about that. I'll be showing you a wellness center here shortly that went overboard on that. It's called Celebration, it was called the Celebration Wellness Center to start out with. And it was the place that you go and work out. It's in Celebration, Florida. And they used kind of the Walt Disney approach. What they did is they hid all the health care around the perimeter, like Walt Disney hides all the scary machines and all you see is the fun stuff. Same deal here. And they thought this was great. It would really make it easier for people to go to the hospital. Well, it backfired on them because people wouldn't take the care seriously. They wouldn't go to their wellness center for surgery because they felt like it was sort of slipshod. You know, it's the place I work out. It's not the place I want to go get operated on, you know. So that was a backfire, but in taking this idea a little too far. This is one of the patient rooms, you know, doesn't look like that. Baden-Baden doesn't look like any patient room you've seen. So now moving on to ambulatory care. If you're waiting for, say, outpatient surgery, you're waiting for a loved one who's in outpatient surgery, there is nothing like waiting outdoors. Have any of you ever waited outdoors during a surgical experience? Oh my gosh, the stress levels just disappear. I mean, it really helps to have that access to daylight while you're waiting to find out how your loved one did in surgery. So we see a lot of opportunities for people to wait outdoors. We see daylight being brought into waiting areas. And that really reduces those stress levels too. Here's a very important opportunity in both ambulatory care and acute care. When you have a registration, you want to try to keep it as private as possible so that people don't hear your personal information. These little details really empower patients. Patients get intimidated, patients and families get intimidated really easily in a healthcare environment. You want to just try to get the details right so that they feel more and more comfortable. Context is important. This is a ambulatory care center in La Jolla, and they have sort of a Spanish look, you know, that makes it feel a little bit more comfortable for their Hispanic population that uses it. Details like having outlets so that you can plug in your laptop. These outlets are in the bottoms of the lamps. That makes it quite easy to access. People have a lot of trouble getting through to those plugs. Waiting rooms are notoriously bad for things like this where they don't have outlets. It's a great idea to have Wi-Fi in the waiting room. It's a great idea to have current magazines, not magazines that are filthy dirty with all sorts of goop spilled on them that are 10 years old. What does that say about your medical practice if you have filthy magazines and dusty plants sitting out in the, you know, that's not the best advertisement. So it's important to get these details right. Have different levels for check-in. If you look closely, you can see there's a real high, a medium, and a low level. So wheelchair users could wheel up sideways and use that counter. It would actually be better to have some knee space for them to get under to fill out a registration. This is a good example of that cutout near the reception area for downward gazing that I just told you about. And there's a space here at the end, that rounded end, for a wheelchair user to come and join. And then on the other side of this waiting room, they've given you appropriate distance to strangers. See those two chairs in the background? If you want some privacy, you've got a place to do it, but they also have a family grouping in the foreground if the whole family wants to be together. This makes patients feel a lot more comfortable if you respect their personal space and plan so that they can maintain some space if they need it. I love this slide. We're going to move now into some ambulatory care for children. Children love something like change within a secure environment. So this is a haunted house, a haunted forest. Kids really get intrigued by this. And they have dappled light on the carpet that makes it look a little bit like leaves down there. And the kids like to be in anything spooky. But it has to be secure. It can't be too spooky or they're going to run into trouble. You're going to love doing pediatric design. It is really the most intriguing area because you can use your creativity and try all these fun things when designing for children. You have to make sure that your waiting areas include areas that have open views. If a person is reading lips, you wouldn't want a tall plant like this in between two chairs because it would be difficult to read lips. You want to have your receptionist well lighted so that the person can read the lips. And we all depend on body language. More than you realize, we depend on body language. So you want to keep your spaces clear, open, easily visible, as much as possible. You can't always do that, but as much as possible. Just a few space planning ideas. To add seating for a wheelchair user, you can get 6 people around this seating with 1 wheelchair user in a 60-inch round table. And arranging furnishings and planning exam rooms, some of the nicest details, a curtain on a track. Can you see that in that lower corner? That's really nice. Have you ever been changing your clothes and then had a provider walk in on you, when you're halfway out of your pantyhose or something, it's a little bit embarrassing. So it's nice to have that curtain on the track, have a coat hook there, have a mirror so you can kind of get straightened around after the exam. Notice how the door swings. See, it's swinging to offer you a little bit of protection so that when a person enters the exam room, they're not going to get a direct view of the exam table immediately, which is a good thing. And then the stool for the provider on the other side, and the exam table with enough space to kind of walk around and check out different sides of the body. A hook to hang up your clothes, simple thing. An accessible exam table that can be lowered to the height of a wheelchair user, and if they're paralyzed from the waist down, they may need stirrups like this in order to hold their legs during the exam. In many treatment rooms and in exam rooms, painful things occur, and you want to make sure that you have great acoustics, especially when you're looking at transmitted noise. So you want to control the noise transmitted from space to space. This slide demonstrates staggered stud construction, and basically you use two base plates and stagger the studs back and forth so that you create an airspace along the entire wall. You can fill that with insulation if you want to, but the air actually works quite well on its own. And that way you're not going to have people hearing noise in other parts of the building. This is especially important in therapy areas, occupational therapy, physical therapy. There's some pain involved in therapy, and you really don't want to hear people screeching during the therapy. Here's a nice touch, having lockers where people can lock their clothes in case they have to go to another part of the building. You see that frequently when you're having a mammogram, or when you have a procedure in another part of the building and you have to be in your robe. This is a layout of a medical office building. It's a medical, with a series of exam rooms, medical office. And a couple of nice features. They have two different waiting rooms on either side of that entry corridor, so that this was a pediatric exam area. You could have the well children on one side and the sicker children on the other side, so that you don't have people coughing on you when you're basically pretty well. If you'll also notice, there are consulting rooms over on the left. As you walk around, it eventually works its way into exam rooms around the perimeter, and the exit is right over here, right at a different location than the entrance, which is right here. So you don't have people walking back through the exam room or back through the waiting room after they've had treatment. They stop right here, they pay their bill, and then they exit. That makes a lot more sense, because sometimes people are all patched up and they have things done to them, and it's embarrassing to walk back through the reception room after treatment. So a separate exit and entrance, and then near the exit, it's nice to have a little table with a mirror where you can get fixed up, especially if you didn't have that in the exam room. There are certain types of practices where this is more important than others. For example, plastic surgery. Many plastic surgery procedures are done on a daytime basis, and it's great to have a place to kind of sit back, recover, have a little lounge, maybe take a breather before you leave the office, and then get fixed up if you want to. This is another wayfinding technique. It's windows into spaces so that you can not only find your way through the space and see where you are, but you can also stay oriented knowing that I am now walking by the waiting room. Strong architectural elements are great for wayfinding. So you say take a left at the arches going down the hallway. And this particular design also visually foreshortens a long institutional looking hallway by putting these arches down it. I think she did a great job with that. You can use architecture in wayfinding to direct you. The walls can actually direct you into the right entrance, as you have here. This is a radiation oncology clinic. What do you think of when you're told you have cancer? You think you're going to die, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. So what you want to do is to integrate life into the waiting room. So we have here plants and water and this feeling of life. The worst thing you can do is put a picture of a sunset. Not a good plan. Or clouds up on the ceiling. What do you think of when you see clouds on the ceiling? You think of heaven, right? Not what you want to think of when you're going to die. So that's not the message you want to deliver. But a natural setting like this is a much better choice. And in this particular clinic, they brought in 15 chairs and they surveyed 200 to 300 patients to allow them to pick their favorite chairs. And they only put the patient-selected chairs in the waiting room. Now, wouldn't that be nice to be able to have some input on the chair that you're going to use? And of course the companion care bathroom, so that you could bring a service dog with you perhaps. You could, a mom could bring her older sons in and help them. A dad could bring the daughters in. You know, it just makes a lot more sense to have a family care bathroom. Unisex bathroom is another name for this. So we frequently use those in waiting rooms. This is a nice detail. Look at the grips above this mirror, or in front of that mirror, so that a person can stand up and hang on. And then there's a cane holder over to the right. That's a detail of the grips. Also notice how far down that mirror comes, so that a wheelchair user can easily see themselves in the mirror. You want to keep it at least down 42 inches above the floor. A cantilevered sink, so that when a wheelchair user picks up their elbows, picks up their hands after washing them, and the water drips off the elbows, you can catch it a little bit. And notice how that drain is offset so that the pipe doesn't interfere with your knee space. This is an important slide. It's really very important in all aspects of healthcare. But my mom was the coordinator of Craig Rehab Hospital in Denver, and they put in all new toilets at an ADA required compliant height, 17 to 19 inches. Every toilet in the hospital had to be torn out, and they had to start over again because none of their patients could use the toilet. It wasn't that they had trouble transferring at that height. They couldn't get their leg bags emptied because they couldn't hold their leg up high enough to have it empty over the top of the toilet. So better to use a standard height toilet in healthcare and then put an elevated seat so that they can empty that leg bag in that slot, you know, between the seat and the bowl. We do have stabilizers on those toilet seats that you can put in. They're like little L brackets that hold it inside the bowl so that you don't end up with it being insecure. And also people reach between their legs to do what's called digital manipulation to get started going to the bathroom. It's also called self-cathing. And they have to have enough space to do that. And a setup like this with an open seat and an elevation away from the bowl makes it really easy to do that. So those are two pluses to this. This is an Alzheimer's daycare center, and they have a lot of natural light. It's not really a very good photo. The space is much more inviting than this, but you have these great big skylights for access to natural light. I put this slide in because they have a detail that I really like. If you'll notice the big open reception or dining area where it says breakfast bar, and you go to the left of that, there is a bathroom right next to it, right in this area, that allows you to go in and change diapers if someone has had an accident. And they even went so far as to plan diaper storage up above the toilet so that the staff could easily and quickly get them changed. There's a laundry there where they could wash their clothes if necessary. They have a backup change of clothes, and there's a whole lot less embarrassment involved when they can get them right in and do that. This is a combination of senior daycare and child care, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. With the senior care on the right, child care on the left, the two can mix as much or as little as they want to. And I think it's a kind of a neat mix, you know, kind of works well. And this is Respite Care in Scandinavia. It's a place where you can take a loved one for a few days and get a few days off, maybe even a week, and go take a vacation and know that they're well cared for. But they have a very deinstitutionalized look here. This is the nurse's station right here. It's the kitchen counter. That's where they do the charting. They don't have a separate nurse's station. I'll show you the layout of this. You can see in the foreground they have dining with the kitchen in between, and then a living space on the other side with a fireplace, and then surrounded by bedrooms. So it sort of has a family feel to it. It's very small, but this is a very important part of along the continuum of care, health care that would offer respite to families. And this is that wellness center I just told you about in Celebration, where they had to change the name to Celebration Health because no one would go get treated at a wellness center. But they did some things really right. One of the best things is they have all of the houses connected to the hospital with fiber optic cable. So they have what's called a buddy system that lets you monitor pulse oximetry, blood gases, blood pressure, all of this from the hospital. So that keeps you at home longer and out of the hospital. You also can access the menu at the hospital from your house and see if you want to go to the wellness center and have a meal. They have all these classes that they offer at the wellness center. Hospitals are becoming more about teaching than about treatment, and the doctor's becoming more of a teacher than a provider of healthcare services. It's going more and more in that direction, so you frequently see a lot of education taking place at hospitals. Now let's move on to acute care. This is a birthing center. And you can see how innocuous it looks until all the equipment comes out and you're good to go, you know. But most of the time it's pretty understated in design. Here's another one that does the same thing. This is the before, and then this is the after with the equipment opened up. Not quite as spectacular. I really like this birthing center because it offers a little corner place for you to have a celebration with your husband after the birthing experience. They do spend some money on these birthing centers, and they're actually sort of a neat growing area for healthcare interior design services. They sort of want to impress you from the get-go. You know, if they've got you when you're first having your baby, they feel like they've got you for life, you know. So that's their marketing ploy, is to put money into their birthing centers. And you've seen some pretty fancy birthing centers, I'll bet, for that reason. This is one of my favorite projects. It's Rainbow Babies Hospital, and this is a constellation in the ceiling. You can actually find Orion and different constellations in that ceiling, and if you'll look closely, you'll see these little telescopes. See the telescopes on the railing? So kids can look up there and identify all of these constellations. Isn't that a cool idea? That's what's so fun about children's hospitals, is the innovation that you get into. They have a slide to go from story to story. So instead of taking the stairs down to the ground floor, you can take a slide. Isn't that a great idea? They've used neighborhoods or pods to try to sort of humanize this space and deinstitutionalize it. So the layouts are in sort of neighborhoods for each of the treatment rooms. And they also have a little bed in the window, like I did at the Toronto Rehab Hospital. That sofa turns into a bed. It'll flatten out, and you can use it for sleeping in the window. And it turns out the kids just live in those windows. That's where they like to hang out. They don't want to be in the bed. Oh, this is at the Rhode Island Hospital. They put this wonderful kids' playhouse in the waiting room for acute care, and they had a problem. The kids liked it so much they couldn't get in there and get the kids out. So they couldn't get them to their appointments, you know, they couldn't get them in to see the docs, and they had to actually take the playhouse out because it was too effective at distracting the kids. But you want to use these positive distractions as often as possible in healthcare design. This fountain is operable by the kids. They push that button in the foreground right next to the turtle, and they can turn the fountain on and off. They love to do that. And these large windows in this children's hospital have stencils on them to reduce the scale. This is one of the techniques you want to use in healthcare design for pediatrics. You want to try to get that scale more down to the level of the child. So the worst thing you can do is have this big impressive entrance, this massive monumental scale as you first walk into the hospital. Try to keep everything down at children's scale if you possibly can. Makes it a whole lot less scary for the children. even patterns on the roof. A lot of time is spent on your back looking up at the ceiling. So here's some patterns to kind of intrigue you as you're looking up, get your imagination going a little bit. Therapy can be made into a game. It's painful for people. It's really hard for people to get out of bed, be uncomfortable, make their way down to therapy, and then basically get tortured when they're down there, you know. So if you can make it as pleasant as possible, and in pediatrics, it's really great to make it into a game where they can jump in the balls, or they can practice their balance on the board that crosses the stream, or they can jump on those round drum-like structures and make them go up or down. And they can actually play games, like they have a checkerboard there. You know, anything to keep them moving and active and healing. This is one of my favorite projects. This is the Native American Health Center in Anchorage, Alaska. And it's the place where all Native Alaskan Health Center, it's a place where all Native Alaskans receive health care in one location in Alaska. They fly them in from all over for health care here. So the architect actually went to an Eskimo village and tried to determine what design elements they're most comfortable with. It turns out they're most comfortable with large beams, very heavy beams, and much of their seating is arranged around a central kind of kiva, you know, where they have a fire in the center. So the first thing he did was to make a sort of display here showing a fish rising out of water. This is a bronze sculpture with the fish rising out of water. And then behind that is the seating area, and you can see the skylight up above that comes down, and the seating area is circular. They filled the hospital with all sorts of wayfinding cues, things that make people feel more comfortable. The idea is stretching skins over structure, so that's what they did at the entry as you go in. They have ice sculptures. They have fur ski parkas. It turns out many of the Native Alaskans don't read, so you can't tell them to follow the signs back to the doctor's office. You say to them, take a left at the ski parka, take a right at the ice sculpture. That's how you get them through the hospital. This is Jarna, Sweden. It's the anthroposophic medicine movement. They've been able to prove that you can use color to help people to heal. Now the way that they do it is they put you in a cool room if you have a warm illness like an infection, and they put you in a warm room if you have a cool illness like arthritis. And they're actually able to change your body temperature by a degree or two based on the color of the space that you're staying in. They've been able to measure this. So I think it's sort of interesting to look at that. I think the research is a little sketchy, so I'd approach it with a grain of salt, but I think it's an interesting idea. And this is Plane Tree. Plane Tree is one of my favorite projects. This shows the nurses' stations right outside of the patient rooms so that they have really direct access to the patients. Plane Tree is all over this country. They have Plane Tree in most states now, and it's something that a hospital can subscribe to and even design their hospital using these Plane Tree guidelines. It starts when you first drive into the parking lot. You get out of your car and you hear classical music being played in the parking lot. Then you walk into the front door and you're asked to wait in a library until you receive treatment. It's a medical library where you can research your own disease, and they have you wait in the library. Then as you're walking through the corridors to treatment, they may have a performance, they may have musicians, they may have pet therapy, they can have all of these things to kind of make you feel more comfortable as you get back to therapy. They use skylights over strong architectural elements like this spiral staircase so that you can easily find your way back to it and find your way through the building. And there's the skylight above it. And there's our dog for pet therapy. Those Goldens put up with a lot, don't they? They'll have resting places every 100 feet throughout the hospital. That's a very important point. It's hard to get people out of bed when they're afraid they're not going to be able to make it to their destination without falling down because they'll be so tired. So to have resting places is an important point. And you'll never believe what this is. This is an ER. With a grand piano in it, with a fish tank, with a beautiful outdoor patio. The reason they can do this is in Phoenix, the reason they can do it is that the patients are triaged immediately when they come into the ER. They are taken right back to an exam room. You don't have patients waiting in the waiting room. So you don't have a lot of people who are battered or bashed up, or having problems in the waiting room. This is a waiting room for families. And it's set up to make families feel even more comfortable. They even have the fragrance of baking bread. Now, is that a little different than most ERs or not? They really try hard to minimize the impact of the ER. There's the aquarium. Of course, they have Wi-Fi and television and all sorts of positive distractions to keep your mind off the problem. It's very important in an ER or an ED, an emergency department, to identify where the entrance is as soon as you're driving up, because you're usually in dire straits. So a very strong architectural element that says this is the entrance that you can easily identify. And then finally, ICUs. You hardly ever see an ICU with access to daylight, and every single room in this ICU is on an outside wall. That's very important, and it's something that they have ICU narcosis, where you get so turned around that you really have no idea what's going on. So that's one important point. This is actually a really interesting ICU. It's called a universal patient room, and it was designed so that the patient is taken into this room from the ER, or as an ER. It's treated as an ER. So you're treated here, some surgery is done here, you go into an intermediate care after surgery, a post-surgery treatment area. You stay here for post-surgery treatment. Instead of being transferred to a hospital room then, you stay in this room. People are moved 7-8 times frequently in the hospital, and every move is very disorienting. So they're trying to do as much as possible actually in this room. And there are 3 zones in this room. You can see the staff zone where the treatment takes place, the patient zone where you stay, and then a family zone at the end of the room. These walls frost so that if you want privacy, you can get it, but if you are really needing a lot of monitoring, they can leave it open so that the staff can watch you, and that's how you can use it as an ICU. So that's the end of the show, folks. Is there anything I can answer in terms of questions?